Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems. The ones that you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. This show is brought to you by the supporters on Patreon. Times are tough for everyone right now, and to be honest, including myself. So, people who do what they can to help me keep the show running despite any difficulties they may be having are more appreciated than you probably realize. I got one new sign up this week from Kristen, so thank you very much, Kristen, for your support. I'm very happy that I do a small part to help you to get a good night's sleep, and here's to many more restful nights for you. A reminder to all existing patrons as well to make sure you set up your custom RSS feed in your podcast app. If you're not sure what to do, I'll advise you to help you out. But also be aware that you can't add manual feeds to, I know, Spotify and our iHeartRadio apps. So if you're listening on those, you may need to switch to something else. But there's some cool stuff there for the various levels, so I'm sure it's worthwhile. There are early release of the main episodes every week, which go out to $2 and $5 patrons, as well as bonus edits and bonus minisodes that go to the $5 level. So if you haven't signed up yet, make sure you sign up and so you don't miss out. So if you're not currently a member of the Patreon and you would like to and have the means to support the production of Sleepy Time Tales, please check out patreon.com/sleepytimetales at the link in the show notes or from the website to see what you can get as a supporter. As I said, their real rewards are available from as little as $2 a month. And that's over and above the knowledge that you are helping thousands of fellow insomniacs to get a good night's sleep. If a monthly commitment is a bit too much for you, there are other options as well, like the tip jar, the merchandise store. And I'd like to remind people as well that the merchandise store has masks available. And for every mask bought, one gets donated to a good cause as well. But other than financial support, there are other ways you can help out. If you have someone in your life who you think will benefit from listening to Sleepy Time Tales to help them get a good night's sleep, just tell them about it. It's definitely not for everybody, but if you think someone will find it useful, let them know. And if you do it on social media, please make sure to tag me so that I can see and I can thank you. You can tag me at Sleepy Time Tales on Instagram or Twitter. Last but not least, I want to, of course, acknowledge the music in the show, which is Un Désert Kumiko. I think the song is an important part of the sonic sort of feel of the show and the relaxing vibe that it creates, so it's very valuable to me. Kumiko's music is available on the Free Music Archive, and I've linked their website in the show notes because they've got some very cool stuff that they've released under various names that's definitely worth checking out. So thank you very much, and let's back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It's a bit of a strange idea. After all, it's a podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But it's 2020 and people are really struggling to sleep right now. It's a health crisis, in fact, and this is a podcast that is intended to help those that it can in a small way to get a restful night. Are you one of those people that finds yourself lying awake at night with your mind spinning and emotions in turmoil with your anxieties and stresses? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find that you just can't quite doze off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to bother them, sleep was always a struggle for me. But it was quite recently in life that I discovered the tendency for droning voices, particularly male ones, to act almost like a tranquilizer for me. I used to lie awake in bed at night because I couldn't sleep, and I would put a podcast on to listen to, and I'd find myself suddenly waking up at the end of it, having missed everything that I was actually trying to listen to. So I started listening to podcasts specifically for the purpose of helping me sleep, and I eventually discovered that there are some out there intended for that purpose. Ones that people were going out of their way to be as boring as possible or unengaging as possible to try to help people get a good night. And I tried a couple that worked very well for me, but often when I recommended them to other people, sometimes they had issues that they didn't like them. They didn't like the narrator's voice, or they didn't like the subject matter or something like that. So I thought to myself, I've got this burning, boring, droning voice. Let me see if I can help someone. There's people out there helping, but maybe there's people I can reach that others can't. And so I started up Sleepy Time Tales. Now, every show starts with this extended intro. We're probably about 8 minutes in at this point, and I'm about halfway. But I know not everybody likes it. It's one of the things that gets the most negative comments on. But it is here for a couple of reasons. Firstly, if you're new to the show, I need to explain the whole point of it. I need to make the case for why and make a few suggestions for ways to engage. For people who've been listening to the show for a longer time, and I know there's some that have been listening basically since day one, I think. For them, it's something a little bit different. For people who have been with the show for a while, I like to use this intro as a chance for them to sort of get into the mental space, to prepare themselves and their rooms and their environments, to build a space together to help them sleep. I don't jump straight into the story and sort of pressurize people to sleep. My philosophy is a little bit different. By the time the story starts, you should be almost halfway there. Brush your teeth, have a drink of water, snuggle in your blankets, nice and comfortable. Make sure your room's not too warm because that's actually bad for your sleep. And get ready to wander off into the dark. As far as I know, there's a couple of different ways to engage with the show. For me, when I listen to my sleep podcasts, I need something to actually listen to. It's not just white noise for me. I need a story that I can focus on, something that holds my attention just enough. Just enough that when sleep comes for me, I'm not inclined to resist it. And for some people, it's something a little bit more primal. They just like sort of white noise of some type. Could be literal white noise or pink noise or the sound of rain or the sound of the ocean or some boring dude reading a 19th century novel. And I'm for the people who have that very specific need. Speaking of 19th century novels, tonight is The Orchid by Robert Grant. It's the story of some fancy people out on a fox hunt, and nothing ever happens to any foxes. I'll warn you about that, so if you're concerned, at least not that I've noticed. And one of the men on the hunt has the plan to propose marriage to a willful young woman who seems like the sort that maybe doesn't really have time for the nonsense of men. So there was concern if she was ever going to be married. Very old-fashioned sort of attitude of a story, of course, but then these are old-fashioned stories that you're listening to. But if it's a tale of staid young men or willful young women or men who are traveling across Russia like a previous episode, whatever the story is, it's important that you don't force it. Don't just keep a light mental grip on the story and the adventures or lack of adventures of what's happening, and allow sleep to come for you, because you do need it. So if you don't fight it, it's a natural process. Now, obviously, I'm hoping that you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it is important that you don't feel pressurized. It may not work on the first night. It might take a few nights for you to get used to listening to my voice or my strange accent. I do suggest that you give at least 2, preferably 3 nights to try. I'm not going to promise you instant results, although I have heard some people, my voice is so soporific they're out almost immediately. But some people need a little bit more help, and we're trying to create habits here. It's something I referred to with long-time listeners. Sleep isn't just going to be something you jump into. It's going to be something you need to work towards. And that's what this show is for. It's also possible that one episode isn't long enough, or if you're like me and you wake up at 3 in the morning and can't get back to sleep, what I would suggest doing actually is download a few episodes and queue them up. With my podcast, what I do is I start with the latest episode as I'm going to sleep, and I just let them play all through the night. When I wake up at 3 a.m., my earbuds may still be in, or they may have fallen out, and I just pop them back in and boop, go back to sleep. Sometimes I even wake up like 30 minutes before my alarm. And when that happens, I do the same thing, pop them back in my ears and fall asleep again. Seems a little bit pointless, doesn't it, to go back to sleep when you got 30 minutes to the alarm, but I've got to tell you now that the days that I successfully do that, I feel amazing. There is just something about allowing yourself to drift off right before the alarm that's just deeply satisfying. But whether it's early in the night and you're struggling to sleep, or late in the night or early in the morning, whatever you do, it's very important that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this may seem strange to you, so give it a chance. And that's the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark, and while you do that, I'll tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who has elected to lie in the dark, listening to my voice. You will always be safe with me, because I'm here to help you relax, to do my small part to help you improve your life in a big way, to help you to face tomorrow and the day after well rested and better able to cope. I believe very strongly in the benefits of kindness. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness with you. And I need you to be kind to yourself. There's no point listening to the show and engaging with what I'm doing when it doesn't work, because you're going to get nights where that happens, and sometimes you're still going to struggle, and it's important not to beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get yourself over the edge of sleep, even with me here in your ears trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep. The intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling we get when we blame ourselves and for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact that you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep and to a better life starting tomorrow. And if you can't let go, forgive yourself and we'll try again tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep is something like an enemy. But it is not your enemy. It's a natural process that we've been pulled away from by stress and life and progress that shines bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. The Orchid by Robert Grant. Copyright 1905 by Charles Scribner's Sons. Chapter 1. It was generally recognized that Lydia Arnold's perceptions were quicker than those of most other people. She was alert in grasping the significance of what was said to her. Her face clearly revealed this. She had the habit of deliberating just an instant before responding, which marked her thought, and when she spoke, her words had a succinct definiteness of their own. The quality of her voice arrested attention. The intonation was finished yet dry. Finished in that it was well modulated, dry in that it was void of enthusiasm. Yet Lydia was far from a grave person. She laughed readily and freely, but in a minor key, which was only in keeping with her other attributes of fastidiousness. Her mental acuteness and conversational poise were accounted for at Westfield, the town within the limits of which dwelt the colony of which she was a member, by the tradition that she had read everything, or more accurately, that she had been permitted to read everything, while still a schoolgirl. Her mother, a beautiful, nervous invalid, one of those mysterious persons whose peculiarities are pigeonholed in the memories of their immediate families, had died in Lydia's infancy. Her amiable but self-indulgent father had been too easygoing, or too obtuse to follow the details of her home training. He had taken refuge from qualms or perplexities by providing a governess, a well-equipped, matronly foreigner, from whom she acquired a correct French accent and composed deportment, both of which were now marks of distinction. Mademoiselle de Marest would have been the last woman to permit a Jean Phil to browse unreservedly in a collection of miscellaneous French novels. But Lydia saw no reason why she should inform her preceptress that having entered her father's library in search of Ivanhoe and the Dutch Republic, she had gone there later to peruse the works of Flaubert, Octave Feuillet, and Guy de Maupassant. Why indeed? For to begin with, was she not an American girl and free to do as she chose? And then again, the evolution was gradual. She had reached this stage of culture by degrees. She read everything which the library contained: poetry, history, philosophy, fiction, and having exhausted these resources, she turned her attention outside and became an omnivorous devourer of current literature. Before her coming out party, she was familiar with all the up-to-date books and had opinions on many problems, sexual and otherwise, though it be said she was an eminently proper young person in her language and behavior, and her knowingness, so far as appeared, was merely intellectual. Early in the day, her father's scrutiny was forever dazzled by the assuring discovery that she was immersed in Scott. Mr. Arnold had been told by some of his contemporaries that the rising generation did not read Sir Walter, a heresy so damnable that when he found his daughter pale with interest over the sorrows of the Bride of Lammermoor, he jumped to the conclusion that her literary taste was conservative, and gave no more thought to this feature of her education. Presently he did what he considered the essentially paternal thing, introduced her to the social world through the medium of a magnificent ball, which taxed his income, though he had been preparing for it for a year or two. As one of a bevy of pretty, innocent-looking maidens in white twill, Lydia attracted favorable comment from the outset by her piquant expression and stylish figure. But shortly after the close of her first session, she was driven into retirement by her father's death, and when next she appeared on the horizon, 16 months later, it was as a spirited follower of the hounds belonging to the Westfield Hunt Club. On the crisp autumn day when the story opens, the members of that energetic body were eagerly discussing the interesting proposition whether or not Miss Lydia Arnold was going to accept Herbert Maxwell as a husband. This was the universal query, and the point had been agitated for the past 6 weeks, with increasing curiosity. The hunting season was now nearing its close, and the lover was still setting a tremendous pace. But none of the closest feminine friends of the young woman in question appeared to have inside information. Even her bosom friend, Mrs. Walter Cole, as she joined the meet that morning, could only say in answer to inquiries that Lydia was mum as an oyster. I suppose the reflection that the offspring might resemble Grandma Maxwell tends to counteract the glamour of the 4 millions, remarked one of the group. Gerald Marcy, a middle-aged bachelor with a partiality for cynical sallies, was also an ex-master of the hounds and one of the veterans of the colony. He was mounted on a solid roan hunter, slightly but becomingly grizzled like himself. Therefore, he gave a twist to his moustache, as he was apt to do after uttering what he thought was a good thing. Most of the Westfield Hunt Club were clean-shaven young men who regarded a moustache as a hirsute superfluity. The nucleus of the club had been formed 20 years previous, in the late 70s, at which time it was the fashion to wear hair on the face. But of the small band of original members, some had grown too stout or too shaky to hunt. Most had families which forbade them to run the risk of breaking their necks, and others were dead. Mrs. Cole's reply was uttered so that only Marcy heard it. Perhaps she feared to shock the smooth-shaven younger men, for although she prided herself on her complete sophistication in regard to the world and its ways, one evidence of it was that she suited her conversation to the person with whom she was talking. There are points of view which a young matron can discuss with a middle-aged bachelor, which might embarrass or be misinterpreted by less experienced males. So she caused her pony to bound a little apart before she said to Marcy, who followed her, "I doubt very much if children of her own are included in Lydia's scheme of life." Mrs. Cole was a bright-eyed, vivacious woman who talked fast and cleverly. She was fond of making paradoxical remarks and of defending her theses stoutly. She glanced sideways at her companion to observe the effect of this animadversion, then bending, patted the neck of her palfrey caressingly. She was herself the mother of 2 chubby infants, and out of deference to domestic claims, she no longer followed the hounds, but simply took a morning spin to the meets on a safe hack. Marcy smiled appreciatively. As a man of the world, he felt bound to do this, yet as a man of the world, he felt shocked at the hypothesis. Race suicide was in his eyes a cardinal sin, compared with which youthful indiscretions resulting from hot blood appeared trifling and normal. Besides, it was deliberate rebellion against the vested rights of man. The latter consideration gave the cue to his slightly dogged answer. "I rather think that Herbert Maxwell would have something to say about that." Mrs. Cole surveyed him archly, meditating a convincing retort, when suddenly a new group of riders appeared over the crest of an intervening hill. "Here they are," she cried with a gusto which proclaimed that the opportunity for subtle confabulation on the point of issue was at an end. The newcomers, all ardent hunting spirits, Mr. and Mrs. Andrew Cunningham, Miss Peggy Blake, Miss Lydia Arnold, Guy Perry, and Herbert Maxwell, came speeding forward at a brisk gallop. Mrs. Cunningham, May Cunningham, was a short, dumpy woman, amiable and popular, but hard-featured as though she had burned the candle in social comings and goings in her youth, which indeed was the case. But since her marriage she had, by the way of settling down, fixed her energies on a cross-country riding, and was familiarly known as the mother of the hunt. She had an excellent seat. She and her husband, a burly sportsman whose ruling passion was to reduce his weight below 200 pounds, and whose predilection for gaudy effects in waistcoats and stocks always pushed the prevailing fashion hard, were prime movers in the Westfield set. They had no children, and as Mrs. Cole once said, it sometimes seemed as though the hounds took the place of them. Miss Peggy Blake was a breezy Amazon, comely, long-limbed, and enthusiastic, of many adjectives, but simple soul, whose hair was apt to tumble down at inopportune moments, but who stuck at nothing which promised fresh physical exhilaration. Guy Perry, a young broker who had made a fortune in copper stocks, was one of her devoted swains, but dashingly as she rode, her carriage lacked Lydia Arnold's distinction and witchery. Indeed, that slight, dainty young person seemed a part of the animal. So gracefully and jauntily did she follow the movements of a rangy, spirited thoroughbred. When Gerald Marcy exclaimed fervently, "By Jove, but she rides well," no one of the awaiting group was doubtful as to whom he meant. Keeping as close to his Dulcinea as he could, but not quite abreast, came Herbert Maxwell, a rather lumbering equestrian. Fashion had led him, the previous season, as a young man with great possessions, to follow the hounds, but sedately as became a somewhat sober novice. Love now spurred him to take the highest stone walls, and for the purpose he had bought a couple of famous hunters. He had long ago dismissed both fear and caution, and had eyes only for the nape of Miss Arnold's neck as they sped over hill and dale. Twice in the last 6 weeks he had come a cropper, as the phrase is, and been cut up a bit. But he still rode valiantly, bent on running the risk of a final tumble, which would break not his ribs but his heart. In everyday life he appeared large and above the average height, with reddish-brown hair and eyebrows and somewhat grave countenance. Rather a nondescript young man, but entirely unobjectionable. The sort of personality which, as Lydia's friends were saying, a clever woman could mould into a solid, if not ornamental, social pillar. For Herbert Maxwell was a new man. That is, the parents of the members of the Westfield Hunt Club remembered his father as a dealer in furniture, selling goods in his own store, a red-visaged, round-faced, chubby-looking citizen with a huge standing collar gaping at the front. Though he had grown rich in the process, settled in the fashionable quarter of the city, and sent his boy to college in order to make desirable friends and get a good education, it could not be denied that he smelt of varnish, metaphorically if not actually, and that Herbert was, so to speak, on the defensive from a social point of view. Everyone's eye was on him to see that he did not make some break, and inasmuch as he was commonly, if patronizingly spoken of, as a very decent sort of chap, it may be taken for granted that he had managed to escape serious criticism. His sober manner was partly to be accounted for by his determination to keep himself well in hand, which had been formed 10 years previous, during his freshman year, when one of his classmates, to the manner born, informed him in a moment of frankness that he was too loud-mouthed for success. This had been the turning point in his career. He had been toning down ever since. He had been cultivating reserve, checking all temptations towards extravagance of speech, deportment, or dress, and in short had become convincingly repressed. That is, up to the hour of his infatuation for Lydia Arnold. Since then he had let himself go, yet not indecorously and with due regard to the proprieties. All the world loves a lover, and to the Westfield Hunt Club, Herbert Maxwell's kicking over the bars of colourless conventionality appeared both pardonable and refreshing, especially as it was recognised that the manifestations of his ardour, though unmistakable, had not been lacking in taste. The sternest censors in society had not the heart to sneer at the possessor of 4 millions, because the entertainments which he gave in his lady love's honour were more sumptuous than the occasion demanded, and that in his solicitude to keep up with her on the hunting field, he was an easy victim to the horse dealers. Before the bar of nice judgment, it was tacitly admitted that he appeared to be better advantaged than if he had ambled after his goddess, with the lacklustre indifference which some of his betters were apt to affect. It takes one to the manner born to be listless in love, and yet prevail. And so it was that Maxwell's reversion to breakneck manners had given a pleasant thrill to this fastidious colony. Gay greetings and felicitations on the beauty of the day for hunting purposes were exchanged between the newcomers and their friends. The men in their red coats had a word of gallantry or chaff for every woman. New equestrians appeared approaching from diverse directions, while suddenly from the kennels a few rods distant issued a barking, snuffing pack of eager hounds, conducted by Kenneth Post, the master, whose expansive high white stock and shining black leather boots proclaimed that he took his functions seriously. This was a red-letter day for him, as he had invited the hunt to breakfast with him at the clubhouse after the run. Lydia, on her arrival, had guided her thoroughbred to the other side of Mrs. Cole, so deftly that her admirer was shut out from immediate pursuit. At a glance from her, the two women's heads bent close together in scrutiny of some disarrangement in her riding habit. "Fanny," she whispered, "I've done it." "Lydia, when did it happen?" Last evening. I've given him permission to announce it at the breakfast. My dear, I'm just thrilled. You kept us all guessing. I've heard that the betting was even, answered Lydia with dry complacency. The intimation that she had kept the world in the dark was evidently agreeable. I wished you to know, first of all. That was lovely of you, and how clever to escape the bore of writing all those hateful notes. That was just like you, Lydia. I know her girl who wrote 200, and the day they were ready to be sent out changed her mind. I don't wish to run the risk. Here comes Mr. Marcy. Fanny Cole gave her hand an ecstatic squeeze, and they lifted their heads to meet the common enemy, man. It was time to start, and he was solicitous lest something were wrong with Miss Arnold's saddle girths. Beauty in distress, he murmured with a tug at his moustache. Marcy had his commonplace sores, like most of us. Mrs. Cole was opening her mouth to reassure him on that score when she was forestalled by Lydia. That's a question, Mr. Marcy, which can be more easily answered a year or two hence. Marcy bowed low in his saddle. At your pleasure, of course. I did not come to pry. At his best, Marcy had quick perceptions and could put two and two together. He was assisted to the divination that something was in the wind by catching sight at the moment of Herbert Maxwell's countenance. That worthy had been blocked in his progress by pretty Mrs. Baxter, who, having resented his attempt to squeeze past her by the following remark, had barred his way with the horse's flank. We all know where you are heading, Mr. Maxwell, but as a punishment for endeavouring to shove me aside, you must pay toll by talking to me for a little. The culprit had started and stared like one awakened in his sleep, and stammered his apologies to his laughing tormentor. But while she kept him at bay, his eyes could not help straying beyond her, towards the woman of his heart. And it was their peculiar expression which drew from Marcy the remark which he referred to later as an inspiration. It's not exactly pertinent to the subject, Miss Arnold, but Herbert Maxwell has the look this morning of having seen the Holy Grail. Lydia calmly turned her graceful head in the direction indicated, then facing her interrogator, said oracularly, after a pause, The wisest men are liable to see false visions, but provided they are happy, does it really matter, Mr. Marcy? Whereupon, without waiting for a response to this Delphic utterance, she tapped a thoroughbred with her hunting crop and cantered forward to take her place in the van of those about to follow the hounds. Chapter 2. Mrs. Walter Cole was glad to find herself alone after the hounds were off. Without waiting to be joined by any women who, like herself, had come to see the start and intended to jog on the flank, cut corners and so be in at the finish, she put her hack at a brisk canter in the direction of a neighbouring copse, seeking a bridle path through the woods which would bring her out not far from the clubhouse, after a pleasant circuit. She was indeed thrilled, and inasmuch as she must remain tongue-tied, she could not bear the society of her sex, and sought solitude and reverie. And so Lydia had done it. Intimate as they were, she had been kept guessing like the rest, and up to the moment of the disclosure of the absorbing confidence, she had never been able to feel sure whether Lydia would or would not. Lydia married, and if so, she would have been sure to marry some day, and to marry an eminently reputable and presentable man with 4 millions was, after all, an eminently normal proceeding. Yet somehow it was one thing to think of her as liable to marry, another to recognize that she was actually engaged. It was the concrete reality of Lydia Arnold married and settled which set Mrs. Cole's nimble brain spinning with speculative, sympathetic interest as the dry autumn leaves crackled under the hoofs of her walking horse, to which she had given a loose rein. Lydia had such highly evolved ideas of her own, and how would they accord with the connubial relation? Not that she knew these ideas in specific detail, for Lydia had never hinted at a system, but from time to time in the relaxations of spirit intimacy there had been droppings, flashes, innuendos, which had set the world in a new light, blazed the path, as it were, for a new feminine philosophy, and which to a clever woman like herself, fastened securely by domestic ties to the existing order of things, were alike entertaining and suggestive. Mrs. Cole drew a deep breath, as once more recurred to her sundry remarks which had provided her already that morning with material for causing no less experienced a person than Mr. Gerald Marcy to prick up his ears. She and her husband had set up housekeeping on a humble scale, almost poverty from the Westfield point of view, and she remembered the contemplative silence more eloquent than words when, 3 years previous, hungry for enthusiasm, she had taken Lydia into the nursery to admire her firstborn. All her other unmarried friends had gone into ecstasies over baby, as became true daughters of Eve. Lydia, after long scrutiny, had simply said, "Well, dear, I suppose you think it's worthwhile." Thus wondering how Lydia would deal with the problems of matrimony and almost bursting with her secret, Mrs. Cole walked her horse until the novelty of the revelation had worn off a little. When she had left the covert at the point suggested by the baying of the dogs, she caught a glimpse of the hunt on the opposite side of the horizon to that which it had disappeared from view. Assuming that the finish was likely to occur in the meadowlands in the rear of the clubhouse, she proceeded to gallop briskly along the intervening valley in the hope of anticipating the hounds. Time, however, had slipped away faster than she supposed. At all events, when she was still some little distance from the field which was her destination, she beheld the hounds scampering down the slope from the woodlands beyond. A moment later, the air resounded with the yelpings as they attacked the raw meat provided as a reward for the deceit imposed on them by the anise-seeded scent. Close on their heels came the master and the leading spirits of the chase, and by the time Mrs. Cole arrived, the entire hunt had put in an appearance or been accounted for, and it was proceeding leisurely towards the club, gaily comparing notes on the incident of the run. There had been amusing casualties. Douglas Hale's horse, having failed to clear a ditch, had tossed its ponderous rider over its head, happily without serious consequences, and in the act of floundering out had planted a shower of mud on the person of Guy Perry, so that the ordinarily spruce young broker was a sight to behold. The Westfield Hunt Club was one of a number of social colonies in the eastern section of the country, which in the course of the last 25 years have come into being and flourished. Three principal causes have contributed to their evolution: the increase in wealth and in the number of people with comfortable means, the growing partiality for outdoor athletic sports, and the tendency on the part of those who could afford two homes to escape the stuffy air of the cities during as many months as possible, and on the part of young couples with only one home to set up their household gods in the country. Our ancestors of consideration were apt to hug the cities and towns. Their summer excursions to the seaside rarely began before July, and fathers of families preferred to be safe at home before the brewing of the equinoctial storm. But the towering bricks and mortar and increased pressure of urban life have little by little prolonged the season of emancipation in the fresh air and spacious modern villas, with many bathrooms and all the modern improvements have supplanted the primitive cottages of the former generation, just as the rank fields of gay buttercups and daisies have given way to velvety lawns, extensive stables, and terraced Italian gardens. The Westfield Hunt Club was primarily a sporting colony. That is, outdoor sport was its ruling passion. Cross-country riding had been its first love, at a time when the free-born farmers of the neighborhood looked askance at the introduction of what they considered duddish British innovations. Yet it promptly offered hospitality to the rising interest in sports of every kind, and the devotees of tennis, polo, and golf found there ample accommodation to the pursuit of their favorite pastimes. At the date of our narrative, the interest in tennis was at a minimum. Polo, always a sport in which none but the prosperous few can afford to shine, had only a small following, but golf was at the height of its fashionable ascendancy. Everybody was playing golf. Not only the young and supple, the middle-aged and persevering, but every man, however clumsy, and every woman, however feeble or gawky, who felt constrained to follow the latest social fad as a law of his or her being. Every links in the country was crowded with agitated followers of the royal and ancient game, bought clubs galore in the constant hope of acquiring distance and escaping bunkers, and who were alternately pitied and bullied by the attendant army of caddies, sons of the small farmers whose views regarding British innovations had been substantially modified by the accompanying shower of American quarters and dimes. Indeed, it may be said that the attitude of the countryside regarding all the doings of the colony had undergone a gradual but complete change. This was due to the largesse and social tact of the newcomers. To begin with, they were eager to pay roundly for the privilege of trampling down crops and riding through fences. Having thus put matters on a liberal pecuniary basis, they endeavoured to translate grim forbearance for business reasons into a more genial frame of mind by horse shows with popular features and country fairs where fat prizes for large vegetables and free dinners bore testimony to the goodwill of the promoters. A ball at which the pink-coated male members of the club danced with the farmers' wives and daughters, and Mrs. Andrew Cunningham, with a corps of fair assistants, stood up with the country swains while they cut pigeon wings in utter gravity, was an annual sop to local sensibilities and a bid for popular regard. Little by little, the neighbourhood had thawed. Surely the newcomers must be good fellows if Westfield's tax receipts were growing in volume without demur, and there was constantly increasing employment for the people not only on the public roads, but in carpentry, plumbing, and all sorts of jobs on the new places, besides a splendid market for their sheep and chickens and garden produce. From Westfield's standpoint, the ways of some of these individuals with money to burn were puzzling. But if grown-up folk could find amusement in chasing a little white ball across country, the common sense of Westfield could afford to be indulgent under existing circumstances. The quarters to which the hunting party now repaired in gay spirits was, as its appearance indicated, a farmhouse of ancient aspect, which had been altered over to begin with and then amplified later to suit the greater requirements of the club. The rambling effect of the low-studded rooms had been enhanced by sundry wings and annexes, the result of which was far from convincing architecturally, but which suggested a quaint coziness very satisfying and precious to the original members. Progress, reform, innovation, call it what you will, was already rife in the colony itself, a case, it would seem, of refining gold or painting the lily. One had only to observe the more elaborate character of the new houses to be convinced of this. The pioneers had been content to leave their original structures standing, and to do them over with new plumbing and new wallpapers. Then occurred to someone richer than his fellows, or whose wife remembered the scriptural admonition against putting new wine into old bottles, to pull down an ancient farmhouse and replace it with a comely modern villa. The villa was simple and an ornament to the landscape, and though the wiseacres shook their heads and described it as an entering wedge, the general consensus of the colony declared it an improvement. Others followed suit, and within 2 years there was a dozen of these pleasant-looking homes in the vicinity. But latterly a new tendency had manifested itself. 3 sportsmen of large possessions, who had decided to spend most of the year in the country, had erected establishments on an imposing scale, very spacious, very stately, with extensive stables and all the appurtenances befitting a magnificent country seat. As the owners were building simultaneously, there had naturally been some rivalry to produce the most imposing result. The effect of these splendours was already perceptible. Others with large possessions were talking of invading Westfield. Land was rising in value, and it cost the colony more to entertain. Most terrible of all to the pioneers, there was unconcealed whispering that the clubhouse must come down and be replaced by a convenient modern structure. That more commodious stables were needed, that the golf links should be materially lengthened, and that both the annual dues and the membership must be increased to help provide for these improvements. As a consequence, most of the old members were irate on the subject, and Gerald Marcy was quoted as having said that to do away with the original quarters would be an act of sacrilege. Are not the rafters sacred from time-honoured association? He had inquired in a voice trembling with emotion. Principally with champagne had been Guy Perry's comment on this fervent apostrophe. Youth is fickle and partial to change. Gar voiced the sentiment of the younger element in craving modern comfort and conveniences, which could be obtained by demolishing the old rattletrap, as the less conservative styled it, and putting up a clean, commodious, attractive-looking clubhouse. Gar himself had given out that his firm was ready to underwrite the bonds if necessary to finance all the proposed changes. Thus it will be seen that at this period, social conditions at Westfield were in a condition of ferment and change, although the colony was still youthful. Yet differences of opinion were merged on this particular morning in the enjoyment of sport in the crisp autumn weather. Returning members of the hunt found at the clubhouse some of the golf players of both sexes, who had been invited by the master of the hounds to join them at breakfast, and it was not long before the company was seated at a table. Everyone was hungry and everyone seemed in good spirits. Conversation flowed spontaneously, or in other words, everyone seemed to be talking at once. The host, Kenneth Post, finding himself free for a moment from all responsibilities, save to see that the waiters did their duty, inasmuch as the woman on either side of him was exchanging voluble pleasantries with someone else, cast a contented glance around the mahogany. Personal badinage, as he well knew, was the current coin of his set. The occasion on which it was absent or flagged was regarded as dull. Subjects, ideas, theories bored his companions, especially the women, as a social pastime. What they liked was to talk about people, to gossip of one another's affairs or failings when separated, to discharge at one another keen but good-humoured chaff when they met. Naturally, the host was gratified by the universal chatter, for obviously his friends were enjoying themselves. Nevertheless, there seemed to be something in the air not to be explained by the exhilaration resulting from the run, or by cocktails before luncheon. As he mused, his eyes fell on Herbert Maxwell, and he wondered. That solid but faithful equestrian was commonly reticent and rather inert in speech. But now, with face aglow, he was bandying words with Miss Peggy Blake, and another young woman at the same time. Post remembered that he had seen him take 3 drinks at the bar, which for him was an innovation. The master felt knowing, and instinctively his eyes sought the countenance of Miss Arnold. It was demure and furnished no clue to her admirer's mood, unless a faint smile which suggested momentary content was to be regarded as an indication. While Kenneth Post was thus observing his guests, he was recalled to her more active duties by Mrs. Andrew Cunningham, who, in her capacity of mother of the hunt, had been placed at his right hand. Having finished her soft-shell cab and emptied a quiver of timely shafts upon the young man at her other elbow, she had turned to her host for a familiar chat on the topic at the time nearest her heart. "I hope you're on our side, Mr. Post, that you're opposed to the new order of things which would drive everyone except millionaires out of Westfield. Tell me that you intend to vote against pulling down this dear old sanctuary. It's a rookery, if you like, but that's its charm. Will anything they build take the place of it in our affections? We've had lots of good times here, of course, and I'm as fond of the old place as anyone. But the fact is, Mrs. Cunningham, I'm in a difficult position. The younger men count on me in a way. It was they who chose me master, and in a sense I'm their representative. So," he paused, and allowed the ellipsis to convey an intimation of what he might be driven to by the rising generation, of which he was more nearly allied by age than to the older faction. Mrs. Cunningham looked up in his face in doughy expostulation. Her round cheeks reminded him of ruddy but slightly withered crab apples. "The time has come for Andrew and me to pull up stakes, I fear. The life here will be spoiled. Everything is going up in price. Land, servants, marketing, horses, assessments. That's the case everywhere, isn't it?" Kenneth was an easygoing fellow and preferred smiling acquiescence, but when taken squarely to task, he had the courage of his convictions. "The fellows wish more comforts and facilities. There are next to no bathing accommodations at present, and everything is cramped, and really it's so if one looks dispassionately fusty. I adore the fustiness. Wait until you see the improvements. Mark my words, 6 months after they are finished, nothing would induce you to return to the old order of things. We're sure of the money. The loan has been underwritten by syndicate. Mrs. Cunningham groaned. Exactly. So has everything in Westfield, to judge by appearances. The palace erected by the Douglas Hales, the Marburys, and Mr. Gordon Wallace have given the death blow to simple ways. And we shall soon be in the grip of a plutocracy. The original band of gentlemen farmers who came here to get closer to nature and to one another are undone, and have become back members, and, she lowered her voice to suit the exigencies, in case Lydia Arnold accepts Herbert Maxwell, she will not rest until she has something more imposing and gorgeous than anything yet. Kenneth eagerly took advantage of the opportunity to divert the emphasis to that ever-interesting speculation. Have you any light to throw on the burning problem? He asked. The mother of the hunt shook her head. Mrs. Cole said to me only yesterday, I've tried to make up my mind for her by putting myself in her place and endeavouring to decide which conclusion I, with her characteristics, would come to. And I find myself still wobbling because she's Lydia and he's what he is, which would be eminently desirable for some women, but... A sudden hush around the table prevented the conclusion of this philosophic utterance. The sportsman of whom she was speaking had risen with a brimming glass of champagne in one hand, and was accosting the master of the hounds. A general thrill of expectancy succeeded the hush. What was he going to say? Speeches were not altogether unknown at Westfield Hunt breakfasts, but they were not apt to be so impromptu, nor the contribution of such a negative soul as Herbert Maxwell. Gerald Marcy, sitting next to Mrs. Cole, was prompted to repeat his observation of the morning. I was right, he whispered. Has seen the Holy Grail. Wait, just wait, she answered tensely. She knew what was going to happen, and as her dark eyes vibrated deftly from Herbert's face to Lydia's and back again, she longed for two pairs that she might not for an instant lose the expression on either. Meanwhile, the host had rapped on the table and was saying encouragingly, Our friend Mr. Herbert Maxwell desires to make a few remarks. Hear, hear, cried Douglas Hale raucously. His fall had obviously dulled the nicety of his instincts, for everyone else was too curious to utter a word, too rapt to invade the interesting silence. Maxwell had worn the air of a demigod when he rose. A wave of self-consciousness doubtless obliterated the introductory phrases which he had learned by heart, for after a moment's painful silence, he suddenly blurted out, I'm the happiest man in the world, and I want you all to know it. Here was the kernel of the whole matter. What better could he have said? What more was there left to say? The riddle was solved, and the suspense which had hung over Westfield like a cloud for many months was dissolved in a rainbow of romance. There was no need of names, everybody understood, and a shout of delight followed. Every woman in the shrieked her congratulations to the bride-to-be, and those nearest her got possession of a person. Miss Peggy Blake was the nearest, and hence the first. You dear, it's just splendid. The most intensely exciting thing which ever happened, she cried, throwing her arms round Lydia's neck. In the embrace, her hair, which had come loose during the run, fell about her ears, and Guy Perry had to get down on his knees to find the gilt hairpins. There was a babel of superlatives and delirious feminine laughter. The men wrung the happy lover's hands or patted him on the back. When the turmoil subsided, Maxwell was still standing, like St. Michael over the prostrate dragon. He had planted his feet securely for once in his life on the necks of the servants' diffidence and repression. He put out his hand to invite silence. I ask you to drink to the happiness of the loveliest woman in creation. When a man worships a woman as I do her, and she has done him the honour to plight him her troth, why shouldn't he bear witness to his love and blazon her charms and virtues to the stars? God knows I'm going to make her happy if I can. To the happiness of my future wife, Miss Lydia Arnold. All up, cried the master, and the company rose under the spell of love's fervid invocation. He added authoritatively, no heel taps. As they drained their glasses and were in the act of sitting down, Guy Perry conveyed the cordial sentiment of all present towards the proposer of the toast and lover-elect are beginning to trawl. For he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow. Under cover of the swelling song, Mrs. Walter Cole, fluttering in her seat and with her eyes fastened on Lydia's countenance, felt the need of taking Gerald Marcy into her confidence. And that's it for tonight. Thank you for joining me if you're still awake. If you enjoyed the story, it can be found on Project Gutenberg. I've got a link in the show notes to the version that I did the reading from. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Un Désert by Kumiko. Check out more of their work on their website, which you will find linked in the show notes. Good night and sweet dreams.